Peter. Everyone good to go over at Sackett Street?
Yep.
We're all set.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, since 7 o'clock, we'll bring the Board of Water Commission meeting on October 25th to begin. The first item on the agenda is sewer rate discussion, increase and recommendation.
So I think this is Fran. I think we'll do this just like we did with the water rate, discussion and eventual passage of it. So I'd like to have Time Bond kind of do a presentation. That would be Mike from Time Bond, do his presentation to you guys, and then take it from there. Mike?
Hello. May I request screen sharing? Okay, share my screen. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Here to talk about the preliminary findings of our sewer rate evaluation, and I'm going to see if I can, 1 second. Bear with me 1 second. I want to see if I can switch my screen so I'm not staring off camera the whole time. And that is okay. All right. That's that. Okay, and beautiful. Okay. Again, my name is Mike Schrader. I'm with Ty and Bond, and we're here to talk about the preliminary findings of our sewer rate evaluation. The purpose of this presentation tonight is walk through the analysis, the steps of the analysis, and lead you through an informed decision-making process. I can see you if I look over here, but if let's try that. So if anybody has a question or wants to stop me, it's a little hard to see. If you could just speak up, then we can pause or we can go through the whole thing. I'm going to go through some of it relatively quickly. If anybody wants to pause me, please just say something. So the process, is everybody here? Is there anybody that wasn't here for the water evaluation? Okay, so this is the same process. We use a computer or spreadsheet financial model to develop a long-range financial plan for the enterprise, and it consists of projecting your expenses or revenue needs, and then looking at projecting revenues. And when we talk about projecting revenues, we're really thinking about how to distribute those costs back to the users. And then once we have the revenue and the expenses, we calculate the net revenue, which is the difference between the two, and look at adjusting the rates to maintain the fund balance that we want. Calculate user costs afterwards, and then evaluate equity and affordability. So the first thing we're going to do is look at your expenses. So this is the dashboard of the financial model, and at the top here we have the operating expenses, and below what I call capital expenses, and it assembles both the capital outlay, which is rate funded, or budgetary capital that you spend every year, basically not debt funded capital. So it's stuff that you're paying with in the year. The only exception in these unusual times is that your ARPA funds, there's a significant amount of ARPA funds being used in this are projected to be used, and those are not counted in the expenses because that doesn't hit the enterprise. So the customers or your sewer customers are not going to be responsible for that cost. So we pull them outside, and I'll show you what that looks like. So the prior to FY21 is what we call the look back period. So we're looking back at budget and actual values for the different chart of accounts. This is just a high level summary of the main categories of expenses. There's 100 different categories that the city actually uses to fund their enterprise. Then the next part on the going forward, the most current budget is the FY22 budget, and we use that as the starting point to project expenses going forward. And we look at the look back period to see what the performance looked like and what the costs look like over that period, and use that to inform the projections going forward. There is one additional change made, and it's right here in FY24. We've increased the cost for sludge disposal by $200,000, anticipating some future challenges or increases in price due to just the industry's challenges with getting rid of sludge. And then the next, Jeff, that was for you. That's in case I forget to say it later. I did include that. And then the capital expenses, we don't project those. We take them from the CIP that we're going to talk about. So we take the capital outlay, and the new debt service are taken from the CIP, which is a collection of projects and investments that the city is going to need to make in the infrastructure. So this is the CIP. As you can see, it's a very large chart. It's challenging to show it in any way that's readable. Currently, it's sorted by the area of the system. So a sewer system consists basically of the collection system, which are the gravity sewers that collect the sewage from the houses and businesses in the city. And then there's the pumping, which is the pumping stations. And then there's the treatment plant itself. So I've organized them here in one of 100 ways that you could do that, by putting first the collection system, then the pumping, then the treatment, and then by the funding source. So in this case, it's the ARPA funds, the American Recovery Plan Act funding, and we have a tabulation of that. Then the next category are those rate funded, which means basically not debt and not ARPA. So that's typically as the city would get to each year, they would be putting that on their budget or funding it from the retained earnings or fund balance, as we call it. And then we've got some debt funded projects and state revolving fund projects, which is also a form of debt, but it's at a decreased interest rate. So to try to give some
Mike, can you,
yes, sir.
Can you go back 2 slides? That one. So purchase service has kind of been trending at, call it $1.9 million. What caused the significant fall off in 22-23 to like $1.5 million or $1.4 million, $1.5 million? What? I mean, obviously that's a significant reduction in expense. Why would we anticipate that to be that much lower? Or is it because we've experienced rate increases and they just haven't hit the budget? You see what I'm saying? Purchase service in FY20 was.
Oh yeah. So the and is that? I'm sorry. You're on my screen. You are the size of ants in the conference room there.
Yeah, no worries. It's Ron. I'm here.
Oh, hi, Ron. So the way the budgets have worked is the budget. I don't know if I can explain this well. The budget value is the starting point for the expense in that year, and then the budgets are adjusted during the budgeting period or during the year where money is appropriated from the undesignated fund balance or the reserves and added to those different items. And that's what's represented here by this 500,000.
Okay, all right.
So, we'll call it 400,000 of that would go into that line item. And so it's a little bit of a balancing act when the city finishes the
Right.
year.
That you answered my next question is what is that transfer in? And that's to cover, call it budget shortfall, undesignated,
Pretty much coming.
right? Because we didn't budget enough for purchase service because there's been increases in what it's going to cost. All right, okay. I'm just trying to kind of, because the bottom line, the subtotal of operating expenses does seem to be relatively stable, but the component parts are just, I mean, obviously a transfer in, if it's coming in from undesignated, that is clearly a rate deficiency that would not, to cover expenses, cover real operating expenses.
Right. And I think the best way, and Joanna, are you?
I'm here.
Hi.
Why am I?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I'm just calling you out just in case I don't explain this correctly.
No, you did a great job explaining that. That's what it is.
Okay. It's an iterative process where, different costs change year by year, so they're able to use those undesignated fund balances where they're most needed to supplement the original starting point.
If it exists.
If it exists. Yeah.
If it exists. So if it doesn't exist,
We,
it would come out of general fund.
yes, historically, we have gone to the general fund, when we didn't have undesignated.
Okay, all right,
But we generally, we need to do it
which you don't
because
want
we
to do.
underfund, correct?
You don't be under.
We underfund, yes, and this is the reason for a rate increase.
Got it, okay. All right, sorry, Mike, I just wanted to at least make sure I understood that. Thank
No, it's a great question and a quick one too, if I might say.
Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can everyone at Sackett Street just let everyone know who's there? I always forget to ask, but for everyone involved,
Take 10 big steps forward.
now you have to do a walk up. Just
Ron Cole,
John Majolski.
Now, Marco,
Steve Francis.
Heather Drayton,
Frank Kane.
Joanna Williams.
all right. Thank you all very much.
Or what?
Sorry about that, Mike.
No, I appreciate it. I need a Zoom for these, for that room. So, okay, so and that was perfect, by the way. That stopping and going back was good. It's I don't want people to feel like they're being waterboarded here. This is needs to be a interactive experience. So to try to give a sense of the distribution of the costs, I summarized them by the system area. So what we're showing here is collection system costs, infiltration and inflow, treatment in the dark blue, and pumping in the lighter blue there. So you can see there's, for example, a significant amount of pump station work that'll be done in 2024. And then we shift over to some treatment projects. And this is just a sum by component. I had originally done a cost by funding source, but I don't think it was that helpful. So I'll just keep moving on. And what I wanted to show here is where how the budgets are composed every year and how that might change going forward. So what I did was break it into the operating expenses, the existing debt service, which is here in the gray. The red is capital outlay again, or that so-called rate funded capital. Sometimes people call that pay-go or pay-as-you-go or cash. There's a bunch of different terms for it. And then not showing here because it hasn't happened yet is new debt service. So new debt service and everything in the capital improvement plan are projects that haven't happened yet. And that's what we're looking forward for. So there's no difference to the city in terms of new debt and old debt. It's just a way of showing where we're funding future projects and how the budgets will be balanced or will be composed going forward. So starting in FY19, which is the first year of our look back period, you can see roughly 24% rate funded capital, 23 debt, and 53 operating. And then as we go, you can start to see here, that's a significant year here, FY24. The debt, the last payment for the plant improvements or expansion will come off. And then we start to see an increase in both new debt and a pretty steady amount of rate funded capital. And so if we look at where we are now, FY22, you can see that the budgets do go up and the costs go up, and they're in sort of the same kind of a split between new debt service and annual capital expenditures or capital outlay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about revenue and where those revenues come from. And I'll try not to go too slow because I don't want to bore people, but I think it's important to step back and just, take everything from a, sort of point zero and say, well, where does the money come from? What parts, where do we get our money and how does that look in terms of customer costs? So when you look at your revenues, where do they come from? Again, this is the 3-year look back. We have what I call rate revenue, and this is in terms of receipts. So it's actual money that came in that includes the fact that not all the people pay their bills on time and whatnot. And this non-rate revenue includes basically everything else. And the city is fortunate to have a number of sources outside of its customers. And it also includes the what we call liens, penalties, and fees for people that were late paying their bills. And I'll show you how that breaks down. So 70% of your revenue comes from sewer bills, and the 30% comes from all other sources. And when we look at the sewer bills, about 50% of it is based on metered water usage. And also what I thought was really interesting is because we had done the water rates prior, I looked and I wanted to see roughly how many people that were on the sewer system were on water also. Usually it's a smaller amount, that not everybody on the water system's on the sewer system for some reason. That's how it usually goes. In your case, it's almost 100%. So that's actually kind of nice from an equity standpoint that everybody's on both. And in terms of where that, let's just say where the water usage comes from, because we have the water use data, even for the people that are charged flat fees. So we kind of just looked at, how does that break down? So down here we have the commercial, which the M stands for metered. So 38% of your total usage, roughly, actually it's roughly 50-50 because this 38% here with commercial is metered, and these little bits here, there's some churches, a little bit of residential, like big apartments and stuff are considered commercial and are metered. And then there's some actual vice versa. There's some commercial that are charged a flat fee. And then this little piece up here is from Southwick's usage, and they get billed based on a metered usage. The 54% is the residential that gets charged on the EDU or on that flat charge per year. So it's just good to understand where, not only where the money comes from, but how it's determined, how the bills are determined. So it's roughly 50-50 metered versus flat fees. So we want to understand what that metered usages might do over the coming years. So to do that, we looked at the same data we looked at for the water study. And if you remember, this data up top is from the water use. It's from the annual statistical report. It is not necessarily connected to the sewer, but it gives you an overall trend. And then we also compared metered sewer use, which hopefully I'm not confusing this. It's the same data for the water, but it's attributed to people that have sewer service. So they're the same, source of data. That water meter is one data. We don't subtract anything or you know, some communities bill based on a percentage or whatever. This is the same data, but what we're seeing is that in this case, this is all the users, means, you know, everybody gets billed for water based on their water usage, but only the commercial gets billed for sewer usage based on metered water. And what's interesting is that you see that the metered sewer, or the metered use for the commercial, I should say, is going down at about 4.5% per year, but the total only goes down at 2%. So it shows that there's a buffering effect of the of that residential water usage. And based on looking at the data and some projections and a little bit of you know, intuition, we set the model to base on a -3% change per year on that commercial. And the reason is that if you know, it does vary a little bit, and if we're too negative, then it's going to really want high rate increases. So it is something that we want to keep an eye on over time, but for now, that's what we're basing that on. And we're also showing about 22 accounts per year coming in, which was based on the historical data. And I think it might have been the same for the water. So now looking at the non-rate revenue, which is significant. So we want to understand where that's coming from and how we can project that. This line item here breaks down as shown below. So we have the first one is septage. It's about $450,000 a year. We projected that going steady for the evaluation period. And Jeff, I know you're out there, and we had talked about increasing the cost for the septage, and that might have an effect on the total amount that you get. So just to be conservative, which is what we generally want to do, we want to be conservative low, so that if you get more, that's a good thing, but we don't want to count on revenue that may or may not be there. So we held that cost steady at $450,000 a year. And principal forgiveness is the part of the way that the state revolving fund works, where you get a certain amount of your loan forgiven based on economic values and the, you know, your demographics of your community. And they treat it like a revenue source. So even though it's just a cut off your principal, it comes in every year as a revenue source. And then this intermunicipal agreement is from Southwick. They pay for a part of that capital, of that bond that we talked about that's going to go away. So these two revenue sources will go away with the end of that payment. And even though it's a decrease in revenue, you're also decreasing even more than that, the amount that you're paying in debt service every year. So you're net ahead. It just, you know, when you're looking at this slide, it looks like you're losing $600,000 a year. System development, our connection fees and new services coming in, we held that steady. I'm not showing all the background, but you can see these little charts here. These little lines are what that data has done. So system development went up high in 20 and then came down a little bit. So we're projecting like an average of 35,000. So now looking at that, we want to calculate that net revenue. So the base case, or sometimes people call it do nothing, is if we had your existing rates, didn't change anything, and applied those new projects and expenses going forward, this is what it would look like. So you'd see the, and this revenue drop, by the way, this is total revenue. So that's showing that loss of the principal forgiveness and the IMA revenue. It's not usage. It's not all usage. You can see up here, actually, it splits the two out, the usage, and then that that revenue drops here in FY24. So we see that drop. And then it just continues at a negative slope because of the decrease in water usage. So what this would show you is that if doing nothing, the enterprise would become unsustainable or unstable at FY23, because of that, cost going up and revenue not going up. So that net revenue here is negative. And negative net revenue is not necessarily a bad thing if you're controlling it, but in this case, it's not controlled and would result in a negative fund balance. So that indicates to us that we need to increase the rates. So the first scenario that we look at is your existing rate structure. What do we need to do to adjust that to maintain a positive fund balance? So just to quickly run through the.
Just one question.
Sure.
When we looked at go back one slide. When we look at the, that one right there. When we look at the new debt service, which looks not exactly what we're paying now to pay off the expansion, what's in that? Because obviously that increases pretty significantly by FY26. What is constituting the need for incremental debt? In what's the project work that's driving that?
Sorry, I can't jump around in this. So
All right.
what that shows is 4 projects actually.
Okay.
One is a blower sludge building HVAC renovation. One is a plant upgrade anticipatory need in 2026, because an indicator, it's great to pay off your debt, but it's like paying off your car loan. That means you can start to expect to spend more money on your car. It's even worse with a wastewater plant. So once you've paid off that loan, that 20-year note, the equipment there is 20 years old and is going to start to need, improvement and rehabilitation in the future. And Jeff has done a great job of taking advantage of a number of different grant programs and whatnot to upgrade parts of it. But we wanted to carry this number, off in the near future that would take care of other things that experience has shown us will likely happen to a 20-year-old sewer plant.
Right.
And
So clearly, that number, call it 11,256,000.
yep.
That, Jeff, I'm assuming we have at least, because clearly that's going to have to go before City Council, and we can articulate to them what constitutes the $11 million of debt that we would have to take on in the future stream of, I guess, 2026. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Because clearly it's a ton of money, and we're going to have to defend that. And Mike, I appreciate, I drive a car for 4 or 5 years before I have to buy a new one after it's paid off. And I'm not buying or selling. I'm kind of anticipating what some of the city councilors would say, or at least the finance committee would say is, all right, what are we doing that's going to cost us $11.2 million in 2026, where we're going to have to obviously pay for it in debt? I know that's an open-ended question, but I'm just putting that out there because clearly that's a big nugget in the future, call it rate structure that we need, that we're going to have to put arms and legs on to be able to defend.
No, and that's a great point. I could reorganize this yet again to show all the debt projects together, because there's also the operations building for $5 million and sludge dewatering upgrade for $5 million that are also on the books to be funded.
Mike, I think to have that at least in back pocket, to be able to say, hey, this is what we're anticipating that we're going to do, similar to what we did in water. We had this capital plan that was like, all right, we're going to do East Mountain Plant, we're going to do whatever the projects were. And I'm not close enough to wastewater, but I think it's going to be important to be able to articulate that because we can advocate for rate on water. just on revenue versus cost. They have to, do this, they being city council, and they're gonna be much more in our grill about the why.
One important distinction here between water and wastewater is that on the water, we set the rate for a year and we're going to keep revisiting it. On the sewer, the goal is to set them for 5 or 5.5 years. And that that calls for a degree of conservatism because you can't project out that far, and wastewater tends to be very capital intensive. It's a very severe duty environment for everything that you put in there. So that's part of that thinking, is that, you know, what are we going to spend in that future? We want to make sure that we have, you know, that we've taken care of that so that we don't come short. You know, it's a balance. You don't want to go too much, but you don't want to be too little either. Agreed.
I think it's just having visibility to the project stream that's going to drive $11.2 million of spending, because I can see the SRF. We know that we've got a new operations building, and those are specific projects that obviously we've earmarked low cost or zero cost principal forgiveness loans. But the other one that are obviously higher debt service loads, I think you're going to need to be very specific about what constitutes the $11.2 million so that it can be, you know, because again, it's going to go before city council. They're going to say, all right, what are we going to spend $11.2 million in 2026 for? And that's what I'd ask if I was on finance.
Right. No, this is perfect. And I should have said that in the beginning, that this is a pre-discussion of that meeting. And, you know, I'm looking for input on what to, you know, how much data to present, how much detail to get into. And for insights like that, I do appreciate that.
One other question about revenue. There was a reference to, I want to say, American Recovery Fund or whatever it was.
Yes.
Is that, yeah, okay, that right there, excuse me. Is that expected to be ongoing, or this has nothing to do with COVID or anything like that? This is, that we expect to continue on in the future from a funding source standpoint, right?
Right now, what we know is that, and Joanna, please jump in if I go off track, but you either have or you know how much you're going to get. And for right now, that's all we know. So we're only showing that for 23 and 24. And the city was, I believe your total allotment was like 19 million, and 17 of that is going towards sewer.
Pretty much, but not everything is decided for sure until.
Right, some of that's still in this.
Right, it's
still
being discussed. Friday, we have to have all the numbers and the allocations presented, but it doesn't mean
Right, yeah.
the money's there, but we don't know if we can do all the tasks we wish.
Right.
There's certain criteria where you can start.
Or you can only apply that to certain
Correct,
types of
to the
projects.
project.
which we had met as a group, came up with a projects, you know, that we thought, which now you've added, some other entities have gotten involved and think that the money should be elsewhere.
Some of it is already in the works, you know, we got
Yeah,
4 projects going.
if we're calling that as a funding source, we want to make sure we get it, otherwise we need more rate.
It's
Right.
there, it's there,
Yeah.
it's there,
Okay.
but all those projects are being handled with the ARPA money, so that's a bonus.
And that was 21, FY 21, right?
23 and 24.
Right, and it just came out this year.
Oh, okay, oh, I'm sorry, I see it. So those are reasonably high probabilities that we would get that, so we can include it in the funding stream. Okay, all right, I wanted to make sure that wasn't gonna go away, because obviously if it did, it would be a shortfall.
Hey, Mike, I had a question on the projected project costs in general.
Mhm.
And because I know some of these were projecting out for, up to 10 years. Is that based on today's dollars? And, obviously with what we're experiencing with inflation currently, I guess my question is, if we're setting aside those dollar values now, what's our confidence that it's going to cover the project if it doesn't initiate until 3 to 5 years from now?
So these are great, they said you guys were going to ask good questions, and you're not disappointing. These are great questions. And again, it's a balance of, too much or too little. What we're carrying right now for an annual escalator. So this estimated cost here, which it looks like I squeezed that column a little too much, is the cost in the year that's shown. So we, estimated to be $445,000. The escalated cost is the difference between the start year, and I should have walked through this, I'm sorry. The start year is when the cost hits the enterprise. So if it's ARPA or rate funded, that means that's the year you spend the money, you write the check. For debt, it's the year the debt hits, which is usually the year after a large project, or towards the end of it. So we're projecting 3% escalation per year on these capital costs. And that calculates, so if it's, and actually you can see some of these where the numbers set the same. If I have 2027 as a cost year and 2027 as the start years, to prevent it from escalating. And that means that the intent is to spend $1.2 million, not a $1.2 million project that's going to escalate. So in that case, the project might become a little shorter if the cost went up higher than we had projected. Whether or not, right now the cost escalations are higher because of COVID and supply chain disruption. Over time, we're hoping that balances back out. 3% is about what it's been, looking at ENR costs and such over time. We can, that's something that should be monitored. And, you basically have two choices. If you lock in rates, you can either go back and say, well, these assumptions, did not hold true, whether, both some are plus and some are minus, or you push the projects off or do less work. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, thank you.
And that's a variable in the model. A couple years back, we had prices were just really going up very quickly. And I started carrying a higher annual inflation rate or escalation rate. And it just puts too much escalation on the project. So it's, you agonize over every one of these little vectors, trying to, hit it as close to reality as it's going to be. But at the end of the day,
ask one more question.
Assumptions.
Sorry, I can ask one more question on that slide. I know there's sewer extensions listed, it looks like annually. Are there any target neighborhoods for some of that earlier on work?
Are they targeted? Is that your question?
Yeah, does the city have any locations in mind? I could see that being something that city council asks as well, that being a seemingly politically interested topic.
Yeah. So Joe, excuse me. You see that the ARPA funds, number one, cover, address some of the more prominent in the council's minds projects to be completed. You can start at the top there with Old Farm Road neighborhood. You've got Western Ave West, Llewellyn Drive area. You've got Montgomery Road and with some associated streets. And then you've got, so those are the leading projects anyways. But as far as the 1.2 going forward, and then things are going to come up, and there's if you look at the list of projects to be done, it's about a 30-year timeline to complete. And so we will have we'll have answers to the city council for that question. But the bottom line is that you need consistent funding for sewer extensions, so that you'll get to a point where you're going to get to your strategic plan, which they voted on, to sewer certain areas. And again, it's like a 30-year build-out period.
Mark, to that point, $1.2 million for the string of years you've got there. Spitball for me. How many homes would $1.2 million connect?
So, Ron, I'm not proposing that we do $1.2 million worth of work every year. I'm proposing similar to how the I&I is currently handled, with like $850,000 line item every year. That what doesn't get spent then goes into an undesignated account dedicated to that purpose. So similarly, the 1.2 million would then be dedicated to a undesignated account, and it may take a few years to build up to a dollar value that you would need to service a good-sized neighborhood.
So there is a priority plan though in place.
The immediate priority plan are those listed. Okay, and again, that's to the best of our knowledge at this point in time, ARPA is going to cover those. If ARPA doesn't, then it's going to come. Those projects will move and be charged against that 1.2 million annual. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, certainly we can go beyond and look even further. I mean, we have the next phase of Joseph Avenue neighborhood. We have the Country Club Drive side of things, Birch Bluffs. We have further. We have Pinewood Lane. I mean, there's a number of projects. We can go on, and the plan is posted online. I'd be happy to walk through that with any counselor that has a question or concern on some particular element. But that's the strategy in general, is that look to embed in an annual allocation every year certain amount towards that effort, and it'll build up and we'll pay as we go. We will not bond for it. Whatever. It seems that the overzealousness of certain ward counselors had gotten us into some trouble with.
Mark, I guess I think my question kind of goes back to when a ward counselor is advocating for an upgrade in his ward. I think it'd be nice to have in our pocket what the typical cost per home is to do a sewer extension. And I guess that's kind of my question. When I look at Country Club Fern and Rambling estimated at $3 million, how many homes are in that group of streets? And because I think it's good to, pitch it back to Mike Burns to say, listen, Mike, that's 26 homes. That's going to cost you $2.4 million, whatever. And that's kind of the math I'm asking is, and the shocking part to me was that we're going to have 22 homes per year connect. So clearly that's incremental revenue that we're clearly not getting for the investment that we're doing to put connection, to put sewer in that neighborhood. That to me was staggering, that we're going to have 22 connections a year. I hope we're going to have 22 new homes a year built. So you know what I'm asking. I guess that's the point. You're asking as a ward councilor and at large, us to invest in this over the course of 10 years, but what can we expect for revenue to pay for? Beyond saddling the rest of the ratepayer with the expansion.
Ron, if what I'm understanding you're saying, if you're suggesting that the expansion of sewers is going to be pay for itself, they don't.
I'm not, Mark. I'm not at all. I'm not asking for that. But I guess at the same time, we've got to be in a position to say, listen, Councilor Burns or Councilor Morganelli, you're advocating for this. It's going to cost X dollars. And because of that, we've got to be cognizant of how much sewer extension is adding to the cost of the existing ratepayer going forward. You know what I mean? That, I think it's the right thing to do, but the investment in it is actually hitting the current ratepayer who's connected versus the future ratepayers who have the luxury of connecting when they want. You know what I mean? That's kind of my point. And this is a circular argument, but that's a lot of money on the hope that we will at some point get revenue from the people that we put sewer in front of their homes.
So if you're strictly looking at it from a business perspective of when are we going to start seeing revenues from these homes, you're right. It's not a good proposal or proposition. But
No.
we're not in a business.
No, I know. And I'm when we look at what kind of is adding to the cost, I just.
So Ron, in my opinion and in my experience, okay, if you go to the city council without an expansion, without something that they can go back to their constituents and say, this is what we're going to get for a rate increase. If you don't go with extensions, you're going to lose. In that, if you're just going strictly based on, we're going to upgrade our facilities and we're going to have a shiny, sharp, running plant and so forth. Again, it's a political entity you're dealing with as far as the rate. And, at least with this 1.2 million, they walk away saying, I'm going to get something in my ward.
I'm sorry that I don't know this. What's the obligation of the property owner to connect once the sewer has been installed?
There isn't.
Right now, there isn't. The Board of Health had, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of the law is that only the Board of Health can require somebody to tie into the sewer. And they typically do that. The policy currently is that they just do not permit, or had been, now is, they do not permit new septic systems. Okay, if you have a sewer in front of you, your septic goes defunct, you're directed to go to the sewer. Just a little bit ago, the Board of Health had said, no, you have 2 years to connect. Recently, they voted and said that's just too much effort for them to be chasing people. And so they rescinded that. But so that's where it sits.
Thank you.
I'm good, Mark. Thank you. I mean, you certainly answered my question.
I'm happy to discuss it further if you are inclined.
Thanks, Mark.
So I think this is where we were once we show that the existing rates are not sufficient, we look at adjusting them. And we were going to talk about through this a little bit that what the rate structure looks like, just to remind everybody or show people if they haven't seen this. It's residential is based on a flat fee. I haven't heard it called an EDU or an ERU, but that's what a lot of people call it, where residential is like one, and then other uses would be multiples of that. Seniors get a flat fee also. It's about a 70% discount from the regular commercial. We'll talk about that after. And then commercial, they get charged by metered use, and then they have a minimum charge, which is not a base fee. It's if their usage goes below a certain amount, they still have to pay that $95 a quarter. And then the meter use is mostly commercial, we talked about, and then Southwick. So Southwick's a little complicated in that you have an intermunicipal agreement, and as common with those is they had a share of both operating costs and capital costs. So they were paying 25% of the bond for the plant expansion, and we're paying, it's a little complicated. The IMA says that they'll pay 10% on top of the commercial rate, but while they were paying for the bond, they got about a 15% discount off the commercial rate. And we have assumed going forward that they will begin to pay that 10% plus the commercial rate in future years. So basically what this shows is the rate increases that are proposed in percentages that go across all of those various fees that we looked at. So each one of them gets multiplied by the same percentage. It's important to point out, and I meant to note it on here, that the first year, the FY22, it's only a half year increase because of where we are in the fiscal year or in the time of the year now. So it looks like it is a 10% increase, but only for half the year. So the net effect on a total year basis is only 5%. It's one of those things that's really tricky to show one way or the other. And by doing that, we maintain the fund balance around, as you can see, 35% of operating costs. We should also point out that the fund balance went negative in FY20. I don't show the number. It was $308,000 because that was recovered from the general fund, and it's sort of restarting in FY21 with you had a bumper year in FY21, so that 1.14 came from the net revenue of FY21. And going forward, those rate increases will allow the city to have an operating reserve and a buffer for those construction projects and capital projects that we talked about earlier. So that is the rates, what the actual numerical rates look like. And yes, Chris, I do have the table at the end that shows all of the rates, the septage and grease and all that. So this is what we're looking at here for those increases, what it looks like. And the next thing, I guess I should put a pause here. So once we look at that and we said, okay, this is what this looks like, your existing rate structure, exactly how it is. During the project, some of the discussion and some of the meetings, the senior discount came up, and the concern was that it was overly generous or too much of a discount, that 75% discount. So like all these things, we look at them, and this is a good point to point out that I got to bring the manual with me. There's a big giant manual for how you set rates, and it even says in there that the right rates are the ones that work for the community. So it's somewhat formulaic, and there's principles and procedures that you follow. But at the end of the day, it's what works for Westfield versus Chicopee, et cetera. So we wanted to at least look at this. And so to do that, well, I'm sorry, just to summarize, I got ahead of my slide. The total customers that receive your discount is about 15% of your residential customers. And that discount is worth about $330,000. And the sort of the rub with an enterprise fund is it's a closed system. It's that zero sum game. So if these 1,300 people are going to pay less, then everybody else has to pay a little bit more. There's no, except for ARPA, there's no outside, funding that's going to just make that go away. So we asked the question, is this equitable, and should we consider something else? So what's really interesting is in Massachusetts, a lot of towns have senior discounts. And the part of the challenge comes up to say, is there a strong correlation between age and income? And without, going down that sort of an economics rabbit hole, what we did look at was this study that was done by Northeastern Law's Program on Human Rights, water affordability policies in 12 Massachusetts communities that was done in July 2019. So not going to go through this, but just, going through, looking through this, you see 20%, 15 to 30%, 10%, 50%, whatnot. I can make this available. It's available. The whole report's available on the internet. And really what we did was to say, okay, let's just take a look at, instead of 70%, let's do a 50% discount and just see what those impacts are and what that looks like. So basically did the same exact thing, except now that discount rate is a little bit less of a discount, like a 25% less discount. So go through the same process. And what we look at is this customer impacts. And when you're dealing with, this group, who, honestly, you guys are amazing. This is great. It may look like I'm being, interrogated here, but I love it because it means you're engaged. And what we do is we look at these numbers and try to put it in context. So city council has everything else is on their plate too. So when we look at this, we want to get past the ARPA, the, I&I, all this other stuff that we're talking about that's important to us, and put it in terms of customer costs, annual customer costs in dollars, because that's relatable to everybody. So we look at this alternative A, is your existing rate structure, and we calculated the cost for your typical residential, or in this case, all your residential get charged the same, and then a customer with a senior discount. And then we did that under this alternative where the senior discount is less, it's only 25%. And one of the things that I like to do is add the total period for each alternative. And it really is sort of a meaningless number itself, but it allows you to really quickly say, okay, so typical residential is going to pay $48.90 over that period. It's like 9 years. With a less of a discount, they're going to pay, $47.89. And it's the same thing. The senior would pay $16.31 over that period, but now they'd have to pay $23.94 over that same period. So long story short, it saves your residential customer $11, but would cost that senior customer $85 a year. I think it's one of these situations where logically you go through it and it makes a lot of sense. You say, yep, it's actually higher than it is anywhere else, blah, blah, blah. Let's look at reducing it. And then when you do, it's a situation where the that affected class is, you're going to make the seniors pay $85 more a year, which is not a huge amount of money. And it's going to save the rest of the residentials $11 a year. So you can, as far as I'm concerned, by having done this, we can say we looked at it. Whether or not it's worth changing that we'll leave that up to the council or to the city. And that did not surprise me. It's just one of those leverage things with the number of people affected. So this one shows comparison to other communities. I was asked to do this, and frankly, I usually don't like to do it because it's so hard to find peers, meaning you need to compare yourself to someone who's exactly like you to see whether your rates are higher or lower. And the gentleman, Ron, with your car analogy, I think of it like driving around your neighborhood trying to see who makes the most money by what car they drive. You got 4 kids in college, you're that guy that's 6 years past your payoff on your car because you don't want to spend the money on it. But having said that, we compared the annual cost for Westfield against I don't have to read them to you. Well, unless you can't read them. South Hadley, Greenfield, Northampton, Springfield, Chicopee, and Pittsfield. And this is a great example. Pittsfield, a great example. 2017, they'd actually gone down a little bit. And 2019, they had to surge way ahead because they had a substantial project on their wastewater plant. That's what we want to avoid, right? We don't want to just boom, have this giant cost. But, you know, again, I as somebody who dives into the background, the nuts and the bolts and the weeds, I don't find this particularly compelling, other than Westfield has been less than everybody else over time. And, you know, there's a number of reasons for that. One of them that I look at is that debt, again, the debt coming off, and you say that's great, and it is, because it gives you the opportunity to do other things, but it also means that that's the last time a significant debt funded project was done. And it, you know, sometimes is a good way to see that a utility has been to some degree underfunded. So you might be a little bit playing catch up. Oh, you know, I'm sorry. What I need to add to this is where you'll be with the future rate increases. And forgive me 1 second here. So if we say that you're going to be at $574, that was going to put you out here right now, like right where my cursor is. Oops. And if you follow that down, it's still less than the peers, except for Pittsfield, which we don't know what that'll look like in 10 years either. And these 3 orange lines were the average from our tie and bonds rate surveys that we did in 2012, 14, and 17. And you can see that, you know, most of them, Chickpea's right on target. You know, the numbers sort of speak to themselves. I will add that projected cost here so that you can make a better comparison.
Are those averages across Massachusetts, Mike?
Well, yeah, these are averages across the responding communities. So, for example, Northampton did not reply or respond to 2 of our surveys. But we specifically didn't want to just show statewide averages because that's not, you know, there's other factors and regions and that kind of thing that we didn't want to misrepresent. So this group was specifically chosen by call it the project team to be more reflective of or more comparable to Westfield.
So what are the orange lines averages of everyone who responded?
Yeah, everybody who responded. And in the beginning of our rate surveys, we would always report out what the average cost was for sewer, you know, or for water. So these were the averages for we did surveys in 212, 214, 217. And then for 219, I went online to each one of these communities to see what their newest rates were. So it's roughly current.
Okay, thank you.
And then this last slide, this is the affordability metrics that we use. Actually, the industry uses to just sort of gauge what people are paying and is it at a high or a low burden. And the 2 that we look at are the residential indicator, which this is the one, if anybody's ever heard of one, they've heard of this. It's the quote unquote 2% median household income. And we look at the 2 rate structures, both for the regular residential, not the discount. And even at FY31, it's still 1.5%, which is, you know, considered not to be a burden. And then after 20 years of people basically criticizing that one because it uses median, they came out with the household burden indicator, which uses the lowest quintile, that 20th percentile income, and the total cost of water and sewer, which is not shown here, but I use the rates from the water rate survey to calculate costs for water. You add the 2 together and you come up with that number divided by the lowest quintile and add in there the poverty prevalence indicator, which is the total the percentage of people in the community that live at 200% of the poverty level or below. And what's interesting is your poverty prevalence is 23. So it puts you in this center one. And the household burden is really low. So what that shows is that it puts you in the moderate to low burden only because of that poverty prevalence indicator. And if it was less than 20, you'd be in a low burden. And frankly, it's showing that that's the key indicator, and that even if you, lowered your rates or didn't charge sewer, you'd still be in that moderate to low burden because of the number of people in the city that are below 200%. That's always a tough slide to get through. And it's not to say you can afford this or, whatnot. It's just, it's a standard indicator, and it helps put things in perspective. And that is the second to last slide. This is the last slide. This is a table that shows the 5-year ask, the percentage increases for each part of it, including septage, grease, the Southwick rate. And the intent is that you provide this so that at that time, the council can then, approve the actual numbers that are shown. Having said that, are there any questions? What?
Like, that works out, looking at it, that works out to about 7% a year.
That is a good question. So,
And I guess, Joe, the question would be, how do we want to present this to city council? I mean, would it be, these are the proposed steps that we would do annually? And with that, there's a lot of data to digest.
Yeah, I think it's key, like you had pointed out earlier, Ron, to provide the loose CIP of what projects the city anticipates undertaking over, the next, whatever there was on there, 10 years. And identifying the criticality of those projects. And then it might, this might be the summary, but what hits it home for me is that chart that we saw for the water rate study as well, that shows coming in the proposed, debt service that will be undertaken by those projects. I don't know if Mike, you can go back like 6 slides. Maybe it's more than 6, sorry. Yeah. I don't know. I think the best approach is just to keep it concise and then have, the meat behind it, the projects that need to get done. And that's kind of, Mark, why I was asking about the sewer extensions. I understand that. Well, I understand better now that there's a plan in place that I wasn't aware of, and I'm sorry I wasn't aware of it. But I think in order for the city council to digest it, they need to be able to understand, where are these dollars going and what are they being used for? And the plant upgrades being a big one of them, with the $10 million price tag on it, or 11 plus after escalation.
I mean, I did, while we were sitting here, I did the math on the Country Club Fern Rambling Drive. It's about 40 homes in that area. And at $3 million, it's $80,000 a home is what it costs to provide a connection. If that's the math. I mean, and I think those are probably, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, those are probably standard-ish neighborhoods. I mean, they're not overly complicated. They're not overly simple. That would be spitballing what it would cost to provide an extension into a neighborhood, right?
Mark, that's got to be a more complicated neighborhood, right?
Look, each neighborhood has its own complexities. And so, Ron, I'm not sure where your numbers were, but I certainly am not going to question you at this point in time. I would say that, look, this ultimately comes down to the city council's decision here. If they choose not to extend sewers to neighborhoods, I'm fine with that. I mean, that's up to them. It's just, so when the constituents call, or call them or call me, they already have the answer. They voted it one way or the other.
But I guess, so the reason I spoke up there about it being a little more complex, and I guess that's just my understanding of the topography, that's very difficult. You can't gravity sewer that entire thing. You're going to have to put in a new pump station, which is not, I imagine, not typical for sewer extensions.
I'm not sure about that, Joe. I mean, the sewer transmission line in the under the Columbia Greenway is really deep. So we're going to go through the design and go through the analysis. It may be that we don't need a pump station, but it may be that we do. Okay.
Okay.
Because
Sorry
we're not
about
just
that.
looking to sewer that neighborhood. Yet that connection, we're looking to go all the way out to Southwick Road and do Darby Drive with that connection as well. So.
Got it.
So one interesting thing, or one of the sometimes unintended consequences of these presentations is that when you're showing the rate increases and the, especially as a percentage, which can be inflammatory, you know, people start to say things like, well, I didn't get a 10% raise and la, la, la. Then you come here and you say, it's $30 a year. And kind of, you know, if the people were upset at the beginning, they say, oh, well, okay. You know, it's not a big impact. So it's something to keep in mind. And, you know, there's times, and I think we talked about it during one of our meetings, that we can lead with that too, if you want, and sort of, you know, put the punchline ahead and say, so we looked at a bunch of things and, you know, we're a lot of considerations, and recommended rates will affect our residential customers by an average of $30 a year. And that may, you know, set the tone for the rest of the conversation.
I think another good point is how Westfield falls within its quote unquote peers. And then even, you know, taking a step further, you know, like you had mentioned what Pittsfield's undergoing with their massive treatment plant upgrade that they had to do, and how much that's going to affect ratepayers because they were so low and that project cost so much. Trying to avoid that situation.
Yeah, and I believe they still charge based on the number of toilets. You know, how I know I'd be taking out toilets.
Ron or John, do you think that's I don't know, what do you guys
Right,
think?
Mark, I'd bring it to the sewer. Here, you can have it. I want my $100.
Hi, this is Jeff here. Can I speak to the commission quick about the $10 million plant capital?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff. Thanks.
All right. So really quickly, we put that in there as a placeholder because there's a couple unknowns coming up ahead. Of course, like many wastewater treatment plants right now, we're on a expired NIPD's permit, and we did get a mass DEP inspection this year. So we anticipate a new permit coming soon. Don't know how soon, but it's coming because they did inspect all our industrial dischargers also this year. So they're working on a new permit for us. And that new permit's they kept telling us you need to look at Great Barrington Mass permit. It's going to mimic theirs. So I looked at Great Barrington, and they have total nitrogen permit limit. We don't. They have CMOM requirements, capacity management, operation and maintenance of the collection system requirements. We don't. And then the other day, the EPA came out with PFAS strategic roadmap, EPA's commitments to action. And in that document, it says leverage NIPD's permitting to reduce PFAS discharges to waterways expected by winter 2022. So we might get a effluent permit limit on PFAS, which would cost a lot of money to remove PFAS. Potentially, we might be doing a good enough job removing it in the water system. I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns here. We have to put some sort of placeholder in the plant capital improvements. You know, that $10 million can go away very, very quickly with one project. it's either going to be a phosphorus removal tertiary treatment, it's going to be total nitrogen removal, or it's going to be PFAS removal. One of those is going to soak that 10 million up in a heartbeat. And one other thing that was put in this EPA document, EPA is going to finalize risk assessment for PFOA and PFAS and biosolids expected winter 2024. So we might have to come up with a treatment technology to remove PFAS in our biosolids by after 2024, 25, 26, hence the 2026 $10 million hit. We researched dryer technologies for biosolids, $10 million to do a dryer upgrade to reduce our biosolids wet content to actually either landfill it to a state where it'll accept it. Chris Bones on the call. Chris is an expert in biosolids. It can get super expensive really quick, and there's a lot of unknowns for all wastewater treatment facilities right now. So we have to have some sort of placeholder in that column, because that's my gut feeling is that 10 million is going to get spent in a heartbeat, and it's not going to be enough. But I could be putting the cart in front of the horse, but we're doing this rate increase proposal for standard projects, but there's a lot of unknowns on the treatment side right now. Maybe we're being too conservative, but my gut feeling is that we're going to need that 10 million all day long. And it's going to be for one of those three major things: phosphorus, nitrogen, or PFAS. So that was my take on it.
And I would temper that with the ask period. If we're looking to set 5 years, that makes you think more conservatively. If it's not that easy to come in year 3 and say, hey, we just got this permit, like Jeff just said, can we adjust that? If that's not, and I work for another similar community that has a lot going on in terms of sewer separation and plant upgrades, and it's a little more complicated, but they did the same thing. And then 2 years after we set the rates, they had to make modifications to their long-term control plan, and they were sweating every single twist and turn because they had to stay below those rates. So it ended up with a big pop at the end of the 5 years. It's going to go up like 20% because they don't have that ability to change it now. And that's one of the things I was thinking about during this, was that you want to make sure you have that flexibility to do what you need to do. And then, temper that with $30 a year,
Where did the 5-year requirement come in? I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's not a requirement. That was Mr. Crosati just looking at their past practices.
That was a request internal of the city. You're muted, Mark.
Mark, you're muted.
Muted, Mark.
Yeah, Joe, I'm sorry, that's just the city's council's past history, is that they don't look at it every year. They're looking at it like every 8 years or something like that. So in the last one, was some doing, but it was a rate increase every year for 6 years to a total of $100 increase it was 30%, but you get there because it was broken up over the years. But again, so they voted it at that point, and then it was like 8 years before that, and then it was like 6 years before that. They don't look at it every year. It's not something they want to look at. So
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering because of the unknowns that are forthcoming, in the wastewater field.
I mean, at least you're
Bad question, but
you're taking the right step anyways, You've
Once
got
the-
a beginning, a beginning step by putting something in the projections.
sorry if this is another bad question, but once the rates are set for those 5 years, is there a way to reopen them, or is that bad from a different standpoint?
What we're doing right now with the rates that was set way back in 2018, we're adjusting it now.
So I guess what I'm getting at is if there is some significant spike to Westfield in their treatment costs or whatever, any plant addition that needs to be made, there is an avenue avenue to reevaluate and potentially increase the rate at that time if the rates do go through and $10 million is not enough.
Yes, we can amend it. That's what we're doing today by increasing the rate in January of 2022. So that was supposed to carry us through all the way to fiscal year 23, and it's not. We need to amend it currently.
No, yeah, okay, I guess I didn't understand that nuance of it, but it sounds like it's speak now or forever hold your peace, but it's not. There's an opportunity to re-amend the rate if required based on some catastrophic requirement put on Westfield, whether it's a nutrient treatment or PFAS removal, whatever it might be.
Joe, I think the challenge is that we can recommend the rate.
Yeah.
City council sets the rate. So I guess the goal of this is to get in front of them a plan that is palatable to them to set a longer term horizon for the rate increases.
They don't like looking at it.
Right, because they don't want to do it. It's politically,
Driven.
yeah, it's very politically inflammatory. And if we can get them to, and I would tell you, I think it's still gonna be a challenge, but because they don't want to give up power. They don't want to give up
They never will.
the grandstand
They never will.
to basically be there on the pulpit and argue. Like we.
No, right, but I feel like that's the challenge is, right, there's a lot of loans coming, which can cost a significant amount of dollars. And, I understand, right, we're amending the rates that are set to be in place until 2023, but obviously that's not something city council wants to do. At the same time, I don't know how willing they're going to be to say, okay, we think there might be a problem. Let's approve, a $10 million line item for that. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate in, what side are they going to take, and out of our control, right? We're going to recommend what we're going to recommend. In the end, it's their decision, but like you're getting at, Ron, we should come up with the best approach that we think will be successful. And I just struggling, I guess.
I like the way that Mike laid out the line item, or at least somewhat line item detail of what the capital expenses were gonna be. So you got $1.2 million a year in sewer expansion, which counts, their constituents are advocating, they need sewer. So that's 10 million, call it. We've got 10 million earmarked for, and I think Jeff articulated well what the potential anticipated regulatory mandates are going to be, and itemize, hey, if we had to treat for PFAS, if we had to treat for phosphorus, if we had to treat for these, what are the inherent costs of each one of those treatment mandates that would have to be done, and say, all right, these are the things that we've got built out from a capital expansion standpoint, and this is, in order to do this is what we need for rate to cover it. And I think that's probably the only way you can do this. Same way we need water, is all right, this is what we expect for incremental debt service, this is what we've seen, and again, we've hit the general fund for,
Yes.
or I'm sorry, undesignated, what's
Yes, for the
undesignated?
deficit. Or
Right,
undesignated.
so we have no undesignated right now,
We do
so
not.
if we hit it for another $500,000, that's coming out of general fund. That's really the message
That's- yeah,
right now, is
That sound.
without doing anything,
Right.
without doing any expansion, without doing any, that right now we're running a $500,000 a year deficit balance that's coming out of general fund. So minimum, we need a rate to cover that.
Yes, we have to, an enterprise account, you have to support yourself.
And if you don't want to have this discussion every year to cover undesignated, or I'm sorry, to cover general fund, then you need to be more proactive, look longer out in the future, and build a rate, a rate structure, progressing rate structure that's going to cover our future expenses. Otherwise, we're going to come to every year that we are.
Money from the general fund.
Well,
I know this happens very, infrequently, but how much has been nitpicked in the past by council? How much was it nitpicked, 8 months ago or whatever, when you presented it to them?
It's over 700,000, and we had a project as well, Jeff. You still there, Jeff? Right? The blowers, was it, or the scrubber?
Odor control.
Or odor control, we had to take from the general fund for that.
to cover.
Yeah, and you handled the deficit, the general fund handled the deficit of almost 400,000, so that was almost over 11,000, 1,200, right?
If just my opinion, if that becomes a real discussion point, let's call it, then a fallback position would be to say, okay, let's change it to a 3-year ask and see if that works, because that's the uncertainty. I can understand, both sides of it. That, if they're not comfortable with a placeholder like that, then try to pull it back, to 3 years, and you'll know more as you go. I don't know. Again, though, you come back to the rate impacts. It doesn't seem to be putting an inordinate burden on somebody. And I do this all the time, so I am very sensitive to, the economically disadvantaged people and elderly and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like, again, the comparison table that was provided on other local communities, West is very, very low on that list. And right, like Jeff and others are pointing out, there are some significant potential costs coming. The city, I guess we have a feel for if city council is going to nitpick it that precisely, or they're going to, rely on Jeff and others' expertise with what new requirements are heading the city's way in the wastewater, from the wastewater perspective.
We could add, just like I had that one report, we could add covers of other reports too, to just speak to that a little bit.
One compelling thing for me on the $10 million, the rate increases are really a tapered rate increase. So you're starting at a higher rate increase in the beginning, and then it is tapering out. So even as you get into the future where there's more unknowns, that rate increase 5 years out is 4%, which is, it's not that much different than inflation these days. So it almost makes you wonder if even if the 10 million is conservative enough in some ways. So it's a big nugget, but it's so far in the future with so many unknowns that this model still doesn't have a major jump associated with that rate increase. To which you're actually you're still increasing, but not as much out in the future.
Well, and again, my own opinion is I would much rather have a placeholder than not have anything. And either in the case of water, where you're doing them every year, you don't want to say this is what it looks like, and then 3 years later come back and say, oh, we need to go up this really huge amount because we didn't account for this. I'd rather have, Jeff, it comes out in that it's 12 million or 8 million. I'd rather have that than have nothing been there, because this is all based on projections, what you see, what we think, what we know, that kind of thing. And you're making reasonable projections. And you also, what you're seeing is, for once, it's nice to see a client that the economy of scale is working to your advantage. And that's why this is fairly, I don't want to say affordable, but the impacts aren't as much as some of these small systems that we look at that are dealing with PFAS and, they have under 1,000 customers. It's nice to see a system that can buffer that.
Is that 11, 10, and then 11 plus after escalation a real number as far as we can tell for a nutrient removal project? Like, has this been conceptually looked at, or any kind of PFAS project? I guess what I'm getting at is it possible to break it into a couple smaller projects that might be more digestible, that achieve the same intent and maybe hits 2 out of the 3 concerns?
Probably low if any of those things happened. If you had a phosphorus removal project, you'd be putting a new tertiary treatment system in, and $10 million would not cover that for a plant the size of Westfield. It would get you, well along the way, but it's not going to be the full nugget for, and nitrogen as well, depending on what would happen with nitrogen, that could be an expensive upgrade. So it's very theoretical in terms of what you would have to do in the future. But, if any of those big ticket things that Jeff was talking about actually happened, $10 million, that would buffer the future rate increase, but it might not cover everything you need to do.
But what's the time for development as well? I mean, if the EP came out, said, here, you got to do this, it's going to be at least 3 years before you actually see
Right.
that expense.
Yeah,
Right,
typically
but
you,
isn't the threat that this is coming in a NIPD's permit, like potentially tomorrow?
Okay.
Potentially
No, I'm
tomorrow,
not
potentially
saying
10
like that.
years.
We don't know when these costs are coming. They could come, tomorrow. I know the PFAS is potentially 2024, but
So if they told you though tomorrow that you got to do something along those, it's going to take you 3 years to go evaluate it, assess it, design it,
Yep.
build it before
Right.
it actually hits the debt service and the bills actually come in. It's going to be years, and you'll have opportunity then if you can't afford it, if it's not in the rate, go back to council and say we need an adjustment.
Right.
It's going to be a
Okay.
smaller adjustment than since you have something already. So
what I was actually getting at is should we be asking for more? If the option to go back is still realistic, in 4 years, because we're establishing it now, and then there's 4 years for time to go by. Fine. I don't know, Ron and John, how you guys feel about that, but this is and I'm just trying to wrap my head around what council will approve and what I don't know how they're going to react to this. I've never dealt with them from this perspective.
I think that's the question, Joe, and Mark. Mark, you've been around this long enough. Like, what is the best way? We know right now wastewater is running in deficit spending, and it's having to be funded out of the general fund every year. Minimally, I think we've got to get Ray to a position where that's not going to happen near term. But this is always a politically third rail discussion that they don't want to touch, especially in an election year. But I mean, to me, that's really, what minimally we need to resolve right now is to get out of that position and put in a rate that's going to cover basic operating expenses and minimally the future capital projects that we at least have in development right now. But I think it needs to be twofold. I think you got to give them a longer term look, say, hey, this is what, and I think those 3 projects that Chris and Jeff talked about, those are realities that we're probably going to have a $10 million need from a capital expansion standpoint to cover off on one of the 3 and maybe multiples of the 3.
It'd be something new, you don't really know.
$10 million probably is long-term not going to cover it. But what we know today is right now we're operating in a freaking deficit, and it's coming out of general fund, which we have to have a rate increase to cover middle of that.
I think they all know that. I mean, Jeff really has discussed this way back in the spring, and we are coming in after the election. The election is happening on Tuesday. We're not presenting it until Thursday, and it will go right out to finance and LO if they wish. And it's just, we got to really sell them at the finance committee meeting.
Right.
And then hopefully they'll vote on it in early December.
another way I look at that $10 million project, it's 5 years out and it's a debt project. So most of that 10 million is actually in this model is paid outside of the rate increase window. So you're really only looking at a small percentage of the rate increase in the window of this model. Whether it's a $10 million project that's paid over 20 years or a $800 project paid 8 years from now, it's the same thing. It's a way to indicate that there's stuff we don't know yet that has to happen.
Yeah.
You've got current history that council just dealt with the Water Commission, the PFAS, to address PFAS in the water system. I mean, you've had the major expense. They've gone through this. They see these things come out of the woodwork. It was what, $10 million for this for the address on PFAS or more. So I think there'll be some understanding and some empathy when you say you got a placeholder here. Here's 3 things that could be going wrong, and hey.
What I think is interesting too, if you look at these, hopefully you're seeing the comparison to other community slide. What what caused those big increases? This wasn't communities that just decided to charge more. It's because something like this happened to them. They had those significant increases in a permit, and we could dig into that a little bit to say, for example, and I'm not up to speed on all of them, but Chris, you had mentioned that Pittsfield had to put in a big improvement. I'm guessing Greenfield did too. Northampton, they've all experienced those big jumps. That's what we're trying to guard against. Because I can tell you that, if they're unhappy with $30 a year that we're showing, they'll be really unhappy with $100 in 1 year because that thing happened that we didn't account for.
Springfield just got a total nitrogen permit,
Right.
but that wasn't reflected in 2019. They just got it, so their rates are probably going to go up even higher.
And
Joe, because of their nitrogen levels, and they've got to mitigate for that, treat for that.
Yeah, they got a total nitrogen removal permit in their effluent. They got it first. They started with the biggest discharger on the Connecticut River, and they're working their way down. So they're going to Chicopee, Holyoke, Amherst, us. They're working their way from the larger facilities down.
is that part of the Long Island Sound?
Yep.
So it's crazy if you think about it. Long Island Sound, it's affecting you folks. It's affecting other towns like Webster. It's affecting one of our New Hampshire clients that they're part of that too. And they just look for the bigger plants are point sources. So they're considered low hanging fruit.
So keep in mind that the more we expand the sewer system, the harder it is going to be to remove total nitrogen on a pounds per day loading rate. And that's what the permit's going to be, pounds per day. So what they do is they calculate your design flow times 8 milligrams per liter times 8.34 pounds per day gives you your limit. So right now we can meet our limit because we're 50% our design flow. But if we come to our design flow, we're not going to meet our total nitrogen limit that we're going to get. We had a meeting with EPA a year right before COVID hit, and they said, here's all your limits. This is when you're getting it. But I think COVID delayed it all, so we didn't get it yet. But I can't imagine they said, here's your limit, and we're never going to get it. I don't know if, I don't have any other insight than that, but I think we're going to get it. It's just when. And we can meet our limit now, but as our flow increases, we will not be able to meet our total nitrogen limit, hence a nitrogen upgrade that we'll need if we continue to increase our design flow, our flow to the plant. So.
And clearly, Jeff, these are things that if we talk about capital, a $10 million, 11.5, future forecast, these are the kind of specifics that we would need to justify that future investment or future capital need. And that's spot on. It's going to happen. We just don't know when. And we're trying to at least put earmarks out to cover it.
So what's the action from the commission here tonight? Vote an approach to take to city council, essentially? Or proposed rate structure to take to city council?
I think hopefully it's a vote to recommend to the city council what has been presented.
I think we presented to the mayor, to present to the council. Just put something in writing. Do historically what we've done in the past, okay? Get on the agenda for November 4th meeting, that's our goal.
Joe, I think the question is, what are we advocating for a rate, the future? What are we advocating for a rate structured recommendation to the mayor and council?
Just what was on scheduling.
Yeah, I was going to
The
say.
last page of the presentation that Mike had that. spelled
Oh,
out.
Yeah,
yeah.
which is just the flat, it's the current structure with the percentages applied to all of the current billing items.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mike, could you put that back up?
Sure.
I think that's what we phrased it last time, Ron, if that's what we're gonna do, was just identifying the table in the presentation from this meeting.
Yeah.
A, I think is what it is, right? Is that alternative A, Mike?
Yes.
So,
I mean, I personally agree with this. You know, it's just, you know, Mike, the concerns I was bringing up was trying to get out what probability of success there is, right, at the next step, and if there's anything we need to do to change it to make it more successful, but it sounds like this is the approach.
I agree.
One question before the commission votes, the septage rate and the grease rate, who sets that in Westfield? Is that the commission or is that city council as well?
It's all the sewer rates are set by the council,
So even septage and grease, okay, yep, so everything.
set by, ordinance, so yeah.
Ron or John, anything else before the decision?
No, we're good.
So, refresh my memory, if council throws, the council throws up on it, they then pitch it back to us to propose a different,
And we'll work with time bond.
right? I'm just trying to remember what happened in the
Yeah,
past.
perfectly fine.
When is
Hey,
this expected to get to the council?
It'll appear, our hope is the November 4th council meeting on that agenda. I'll do a letter quickly to the mayor. There's a deadline to be on that agenda. So I will get it done by next week. At the end of the week, by Friday, it's gonna be. So,
Okay, I know we haven't set our next meeting, but obviously if there is a need for a special meeting to keep this moving, you know,
we probably won't be.
I know there's gonna be time in between, right, with time bond reworking the rates, but
So in addition to these proposed rate changes, would there also be, well, not necessarily alternative, but some discussion with the mayor to present what we were just talking about?
This will transpire to the finance committee. Once the city council refers it to finance committee, perhaps that one out. Time bond will come in to present it at the finance committee meeting, correct, guys? Chris, we talked about that, right?
Yes, yeah, wherever you need us, that if that's the route it takes, that would be fine, yeah.
So is it at that point, would you then bring up the potential cost expenditures that might be expected with some of the
Yes,
permit changes?
yes, it'll be a discussion just like tonight on this, right? A
Okay.
lot more bodies. And they'll vote on
Because
it.
I just wouldn't want to present just this and give the impression that there's nothing else coming down the road.
No.
And it's, I mean, we can't really put a price tag on it, but I'm with Jeff and others that likely at least one of those things is going to
It will
transpire
happen.
and we'll need to deal with it.
So now time bond will have their expertise in supporting this one.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, the idea was to have kind of a condensed version of this where it still does have the detail and some addresses the questions we've come up with during this meeting so that we've read you guys all of the background information and then can bring it to a little more condensed and but still have it already, other slides that we can bring up if the finance committee asks.
Great. Thanks,
We
Jeff.
then present to the mayor, is that what I heard?
No, that normally is in this scenario, will be presenting to the council at the finance committee meeting, those members and any other councilors that choose to partake, because you don't want to have this come out of the council floor for a lot of discussion. When it comes out, you want it to be voted upon. If they have the faith and trust in what transpired in the finance committee meeting, that's what they're supposed to do.
I see.
Right, but protocol is that if you make a recommendation to the mayor forwards it on to city council then puts it into committee and then brings it out and votes on it.
That's the game plan. You guys, what about?
do I hear a motion?
I make a motion to present the rate structure as proposed in the tie and bond study presented to Water Resource Commission on October 28th, 25th to the mayor for then submission to city council.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor, roll call, Commissioner Cole,
Yes.
Commissioner Najewski,
Yes.
Commissioner Papalarczyk, yes. Okay. Thank everyone very much for going through all that.
I'm gonna say, if you don't mind me saying so, good job. This is, I think you give it a thorough shake.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mike and
Yeah, thank
Chris.
you. That was excellent.
Very
Yeah,
good.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you, Mike, Chris, Jen, Mark. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
All right. The next agenda item is approval of a bunch of minutes. Start with July 6th.
Oh,
John, I don't have any questions on,
yeah, I didn't either. I'll make
on
a
Tuesday, the 6th.
Yeah, I make a motion to accept the minutes of the Water Commission meeting conducted on Tuesday, July 6th, 2021.
All right. I second. Roll call vote, Commissioner Najewski,
Yes.
Commissioner Papalarczyk, yes. I can come in, if I'm needed to sign those, I can come in tomorrow, if that works.
I think I need one signature from a commissioner to have it approved to be posted.
Okay.
And I've got two here tonight, so should be, if I have any problems, I'll give you a call.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yep, of course. The next minutes were July 22nd.
That was the special meeting for the rate increase that we had to remove the tier. So
Sorry, I must have, yeah,
Yep, you're sorry, 1234.
I didn't have any changes.
No changes here.
Yeah, no, it looks fine to me. So, do I hear a motion?
Yep, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the Water Commissioner meeting conducted on Thursday, July 22nd, 2021.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Roll call, Commissioner Cole,
Yes.
Commissioner Najewski,
Yes.
Commissioner Papalarczyk, yes. Right, and then the final meeting, September 7th.
7th, yeah. This is the meeting where we reviewed and voted on the uncollectible receivables and discussion regarding the water main and Airport Road. And we had project updates provided. So I'm interested to hear about updates tonight on that. So I didn't have any changes on this.
Yeah.
All right, I wasn't in attendance, so I'll leave it up to the two of you.
Yep. So I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the Water Commissioners meeting conducted on Tuesday, September 7th, 2020.
Second.
Roll call, Commissioner Cole,
Yes.
Commissioner Najewski.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Excuse me, move on to, I'm sorry. The last item, department project updates.
So, we are currently running Owen District on the north side. We've had about 328 million gallons of treated water through the plant. All of our lab values are right where they should be, so, so we're doing well on that. well 2 is still, on standby. We're not needing to run it because of, demand numbers, but if there, we need it. We are still working on the, Proven Mountain storage tank. We encountered some additional deterioration. And so our focus on that in terms of the rehab has shifted a little bit. And our timeline for future work on that is shorter. We have been looking at, sometime in the next 10 years, we might need to do a project like East Mountain Road. That timeline is shorter now, based on the deterioration of the tank structure. We're looking at more like a 3 to 5 year max before that will need either replacement or full rehab, which would be likely just as expensive as a replacement. We're in the process of doing a preliminary sizing work to see how big of a tank we need to replace it with, and then we'll look at things like East Mountain. Do we have enough property out there to site one near it so we can do a similar type project? Once we have that information, we'll be looking at moving forward with planning for that type of project. So, and as far as East Mountain's concerned, we're just wrapping up the final paperwork and things on that, but staging's done. So that's where. Dry Bridge, the water main and the treatment plant are both out to bid now. They're posted on the city's purchasing and procurement website. So we've got some dates coming up for pre-bid meetings and things like that. Bids get open on the water main work in mid-November and the plant in the beginning of December. So we are marching right forward with that. And we've continued to have a wet year, so our reservoir is full. We're currently looking to lower it a little bit so that we can get flashboards out for winter. And otherwise, I'd be happy to answer any questions about anything else going on in the system, but we're that's pretty much the state of things at the moment.
With the reservoir, I think last time you had mentioned there was either no use or limited use because of the turbidity of the rain. So
yeah, so we're back online.
Okay.
Once the turbidity went down, and we saw demand get to the point where we need to bring it back online again, and the turbidity stayed low enough, we also took advantage of doing some clean out of the clear well in that time, but we were able to bring the plant back online and now it's running as well. So.
Are we still testing it too?
Yeah.
And saying, have we had breakthrough at any one of the test points?
So we have seen those low level numbers at the 25% port, and we have seen a couple of J values, those qualified below reporting limit values, have shown up at the, I think there's been one that's shown up at the 50%, but it's kind of sporadic. We don't necessarily, it's not consistent with it. And then we also saw some values that we think that were qualified. We think were also probably errors in what was it back last year at the point of entry, but we have not been running well to the system because we haven't needed it. So
yeah, in some of those test values, because we have such low flow that you got, retention.
we do.
So you're still
we run it to waste. So, you know, they still do purge enough water through, so we shouldn't be seeing errors because of low flow. But the dynamics of the aquifer could be different because we're not pumping out of there like we had been previously. So, you know, that's certainly a variable that we can't predict.
I was just curious. That's all. Jeff, anything from a wastewater update standpoint?
I'm still here. Yeah, I got a couple updates. We're working with Ty and Bond on designs for replacing Big Stewart Pump Station, all the pneumatic ejector pump stations, actually, all the confined space entry pump stations that have been on the list for like since 2013 to replace. So Big Stewart, South Street, Pachasik, Ponders. Hopefully, so we got all those in the works for design for replacement. And hopefully we have approval for ARPA funding to do the actual construction. Projected cost is around $2 million to do all four. So that's in the works. Hopefully we can put it all out to bid at once. Maybe get one contractor to do all four and have a savings instead of doing all four separately. So that's been long in the works. Hopefully we can get that going. We have Woodard and Curran under contract to design the new operations admin building. We do have approval to use the ARPA funding to use the funds for the design. And then hopefully we'll have SRF funding to build the building. My new focus is hopefully dewatering upgrade, sludge dewatering, new technology. I know like 5 years ago, we rebuilt the belt filter presses with funds in-house, which has gotten us another, 5 years out of the old pieces of equipment, which is really good. They've been running well. We've experienced, a year ago, we experienced a $200,000 increase in sludge hauling and disposal costs. So we got to get drier cake solids, so we're hauling less water in the meantime. So potential newer technology, we might be able to go from our average percent solids is like 19%, 20% cake solids right now. If we can get to 25% cake solids, we could save between $170,000 and $200,000 a year in hauling. So that would be a good upgrade to have. And we had that in the sewer rate study for a sludge dewatering upgrade. So I'd like to potentially work with Ty and Bond on a dewatering design. So that's in the works, hopefully coming down the pipeline. Bob Pluta, you guys all remember Bob Pluta, industrial pretreatment coordinator. He retired in June. So he's gone, and we hired a new industrial pretreatment coordinator. He starts November 1st, so next week. So, and we hired a new plant attendant. So we're slowly restaffing as people leave. And we had a mass DEP inspection. That was a big undertaking this year. So we'll see what happens with that as far as the new NIPD's permit. And I think that's about it for projects and just, other stuff within the plant, trying to Band-Aid things together as usual, but things are going fairly well, meeting permit really well. Our effluent quality is fantastic right now. Very happy with it. So things are going fairly good. I know I haven't seen you guys in a long time, so apologize for not attending a meeting in a long time.
Well, it's good to see you as well.
Thanks. And I know the other thing is DEP, they we have an engineering has consulted with CDM, having work on infiltration and inflow study to help us with that effort. Because when we did get the rainfall that what was the hurricane there back? Was it a month ago? A month and a half ago there, we got a lot of rain. Our baseline flow for the month of September was 5 MGD through the plant for the month of September. And our design flow is 6. So we experienced a ton of infiltration and inflow it was mainly for 2 weeks. The baseline flow was very high. But that was a catastrophic rain event. With all the rain we had in July, it was a very wet summer. So the groundwater table was high as it is. And then that was kind of the tipping point rain event that really put things over the edge. And, we were experiencing very high flow. The influence of the plant doesn't lie. So, but hopefully we can remediate some infiltration and inflow in the next coming years. And along with that, identify some sources. With this study that's going to be done by CDM, they'll identify sources I, and we'll remediate it and move on and get sewer extensions and upgrade the treatment plant and keep moving forward. So that's about all I have.
Again, thank you for coming in over the top on the questions that we had about that. I think it's important that we have awareness, but at the same time, kind of, I would say, posture for council, because I know they will have questions. And just making sure you're prepared for that, because it's obviously a big bucket of money. And the more specific we can be about what the anticipated need is for, the better place will be to get that increase to it. So, thank you.
Understood.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff.
Thanks, Joe.
No problem.
All right, is there anything else? Set the next meeting.
Yeah. So what do you guys think?
Mr. Chair?
Sorry, Mark.
Yep, go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, just wanted to update you as well. Look, we are working on the Old Town effort of George, Frederick, and Parkside as far as improvements of full reconstruction, but the water system is going to be upgraded there. We will be looking to use ARPA funds, so we won't be looking to come to the commission for the funding on that. But just to let you know, that's what we are doing. We're also looking at improvements to Meadow Street. There's a 16-inch main that needs to be extended down Meadow from where it was left off at Great River Bridge area up to the Main Street area. So we'll be investigating that, and we'll have further conversation on that as we go. Western Avenue is construction has begun. They've started on the water system. So they'll be looking for the water department's cooperation in moving that forward. And I think that's pretty much the, and we've started on all those ARPA projects that we've listed in that the CIP. So design is underway. Any questions?
City View.
Okay.
What?
Thank you very much.
No, Mark. City View Boulevard. The culvert there. What's the anticipated remediation or solve? Go ahead, Mark.
Well, the design is to replace the culvert, right, with a concrete box culverts. But are you asking about the design or the time frame?
Timing. Did you hear me? Timing.
Timing.
Time frame.
So that's still a bit of a question. Yes. Yeah, I got you. Is there something wrong with my system or something that?
I think so. You've got a lag.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you, but it seems like you have a lag.
Yeah. Okay. 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 We should be going out to bid in a couple of weeks. There's going to be some delay for procuring or manufacturing the parts that are required. We're still looking at on the face of it, the order of conditions for the effort call for low flow period for the work to be done. And that means potentially not until next summer, but we'll be working through that.
Okay. Other question would be, I think we call it Coles. Yep, thank you. Coles Bridge? Is that?
Yeah, that's the state.
No, that's the one.
It's not the state,
Yeah.
Coles Bridge, yeah, so this, a lot of state.
One by Sunoco?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know you have nothing to do with it, but do you have any updates from the state as to progress or timeframe for that?
My understanding is that they have come to resolution on the contaminated soil and they anticipate to move forward. I understand they're scheduling to do the work on the water, to do the temporary water main over the bridge, those adjustments and connections. Again, those plans are all online, should you have any question on that. But my understanding is they're going to be moving forward. I have not, though, received from the state any kind of public notice or to let them know any hard date when they're going to be really starting construction. But I do anticipate it to be shortly, to the extent that the season allows now.
One last
not much of
question.
an answer.
Yep, no, that's fine. No, that answers it. One last question. Columbia Greenway, I believe that we are having an issue with the overpass on Elm. Any updates on that?
Yes, there has been problems. The bridge is very unique in that with a truss bridge, the trusses are the main beams that are carrying everything. But on that structure, since they're skewed, crossing the roadway, and so the trusses they're not perpendicular to one another. Well, all the floor beams are perpendicular. They're not sort of parallel to the abutments. And so as such, several of the floor beams and intermediate beams are sitting on the foundation directly. And so lifting is not a simple lift up the truss. It's lifting all of those floor members as well. There's been some problems in trying to lift everything. They believe they've come to a final consensus on what's to be done, and I expect they'll be starting that in hopefully a week or two. So, but it will not be done by this construction season. It will extend into next.
Okay.
Is that?
Well, thank you, Mark. That answers that question.
Sure. Along those lines, we've also have a concept that we're working through for redirecting traffic around interchange 41. Again, you'll find that on the City of Westfield's webpage, engineering department. If you're interested, again, this is very preliminary. I'd be happy to bring you more updates as we move forward. But to let you know, we are working on it to try to relieve the congestion in that area.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mark.
I will be presenting to the Board of Public Works at their next meeting. If you would like a presentation, I can do that as well.
Ron, John, is that something we're interested in?
Actually, Mark, let us know how it goes with Public Works. If there are questions, I think it'd be helpful to understand what their needs and asks were.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And good night.
You too. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, next meeting. So we're already at the 25th. Has there been anything, I mean, there wasn't anything else on the agenda tonight. Have there been any resident concerns or anything else coming into the department that we might need to address?
I don't have any resident concerns. I have abatements, but I've just been pushing those off till we have a live meeting, so.
Okay. Are we close to having a live meeting?
So it's up to you guys. So you can either do an in-person meeting or Zoom. You can't do them together.
Got it.
It's whatever you guys want to do. It's no meeting to meeting basis.
I'm fine going back to a live, especially if there's abatements hanging out there. I know I've been the one not coming to Sackett Street, so I bet, everyone else is fine with that as well, but.
In order to do those meetings, we have to do that at City Hall.
Correct, because it has to be handicap accessible. But I just
Yeah,
have
we
to
do
check-
in the normal room, 201 or whatever it is, 203.
Yeah, I just have to make sure that it's open for us. It shouldn't be a problem.
Regarding date, do we want to try to get back on a regular schedule? I mean, the next meeting would be next week. Do we want to try to do like the 8th?
Monday.
There's a Monday, yeah.
For the 9th.
9th, sorry. Yep, 9th.
That's the same night as Public Works, but we could probably work around that.
We can have it. I just can't.
I'm flexible, Ron. I was just throwing out a date, that week. But we can also meet next week if everyone wants to. It's not a big deal.
I can't make next week either.
How about the 16th?
The 16th, I could make.
Okay, I am also available the 16th.
I am as well.
Is it likely there's a room available on the 16th?
I will check tomorrow morning and I'll let you guys know.
Okay. I guess if that date's not available, would you mind just letting us know a couple that we can meet in?
Better just go out to the 7th.
December 7th?
Skip November? Oh, yeah. She has.
Ron, I'm fine with that in principle either way. We've addressed, the only thing that's really outstanding is abatements.
If we can work the 16th.
You know?
Yeah, no. And then get back on schedule for the 7th.
Yes, okay.
You know what I mean? So, Joe, how's that sound? Try to
16th and then the 7th?
and then get back on our regularly scheduled first Tuesday.
Yep, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Same thing though, I guess, Hannah, if there aren't, excuse me, if the 16th is not available for whatever reason, just let us know what dates might be available around that. And if it doesn't work, we'll just wait until the 7th.
Okay, I'll see what I can find.
Okay. All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn at 9:14?
I know you guys will be here again.
I'll make a motion to adjourn, Water Commission meeting of October 25th, 2021.
Second, oops.
Roll call, Commissioner Cole,
Yes.
Commissioner Najrowski,
Yes.
Commissioner Papalarczyk, yes.